It's interesting that the Republicans are so jubilant, as we heard with that, and yet the public opinion is not in their favor in this. The majority of Americans are deeply uneasy about this because I think the Democrats have done quite a good job, actually, in saying their side of the message, which is that this is devastating to millions of people across the country.
Should we kick off with the big, beautiful bill? Some people thought it was less beautiful and a bit ugly. But it's passed, hasn't it? Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the word that Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat leader in the House, used. He said that it was ugly. He actually spoke for over 8 hours to try and sort of express his anger at this bill. 8 hours and 45 minutes. I just had to check my notes there. And that set a new record. But that was quite performative. That was because people have felt that the Democrats are not doing enough to push back about this. All the Democrats voted against it and 2 Republicans, but in the end, this bill was passed. So it will go to Donald Trump's desk tomorrow, of course, Independence Day in the United States, and he will sign it tomorrow afternoon.
Yes, he wanted it to happen by now. But look, we've been mentioning there that marathon speech made by the Democrat Hakeem Jeffries, a record breaker, talking for 8 hours, 44 minutes. Let's just take a listen.
We're going to press on for our children, press on for our seniors, press on for our veterans, press on for our unions, press on for our farmers, press on for our dreamers, press on for working class Americans, press on for the middle class, press on for all who aspire to be part of the middle class, press on for the poor, press on for the sick, press on for the afflicted, press on for the least, press on for the lost, press on for the left behind, press on for the rule of law, press on for the American way of life, press on for democracy. We're going to press on until victory is won.
Well, he did keep pressing on, but as we said, finally, in a vote of 218 to 214, the bill was passed, and at its passing, Republicans burst into chants of USA.
On this vote, the yeas are 218, the nays are 214. The motion is adopted.
There we have it. Well, Harriet, I mean, these were amazing scenes. Donald Trump's got his way and, there was, of course, Democrat opposition to it. But what about Republicans? There were some Republicans not happy. Has it split the party?
Oh, yes, it absolutely has. The Republicans who I mentioned in the House who voted against this, one is from Kentucky, and he voted against it because he really believes that we should not be adding $3.3 trillion to the national deficit. And another who voted against it, a Republican from Pennsylvania, he voted against it because he's very worried about the impact on his constituents, because it's going to leave 12 million people without health insurance, and it's going to increase taxes on some of the poorest people in the country. It's going to gut some rural health care. So essentially, it's tax cuts for the richest while removing services for the poorest. And it's interesting that the Republicans are so jubilant, as we heard with that, and yet the public opinion is not in their favor in this. The majority of Americans are deeply uneasy about this because I think the Democrats have done quite a good job, actually, in saying their side of the message, which is that this is devastating to millions of people across the country.
So what are people going to do about healthcare? Medicaid and Obamacare, we know that they've been controversial. But what sort of backdrop is there now to them, and what sort of help is there for them?
I mean, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of fear. When you ask what people are going to do, the Democrats are going to use this for every ounce that it's worth. They're going to wring every last drop out of this in their campaigns, because they are going to try and unseat the Republicans who voted for it by very much targeting people in states across the country and saying, look, your representative, your senator voted for this, and yet it is costing you. What Americans practically are going to do, I mean, for many, there's little that they can do. I mean, if you rely on food stamps, you no longer have that. I mean, not universally, it's not, but it's certainly making it harder. If you are relying on healthcare from the government, you now have to prove that you are doing work or voluntary work or studying to qualify for it. So it's going to get a lot tougher for that. But it's a big bill. That part of it is undisputable. So there's all different aspects of it. So it's going to affect Americans in very different ways, depending on your income and depending on where you live.
And as you say, I mean, a lot of the people affected by this were the ones that voted for Donald Trump. So one wonders how much reaction there might be to that. National debt, of course, a huge concern. And we know one big figure, Elon Musk, has been describing it as political suicide for the Republicans, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean, he's one of the most high-profile opponents of this, of course. And it's interesting, how many of the Republicans went along with it, having secured concessions. So Donald Trump yesterday held a meeting at the White House to try and convince Republicans to go along with this. Prior to this, when the Senate was voting, they were also trying to kind of wring out concessions. So, for instance, if you are a whaler in Alaska, you get some quite nice carve-outs from this, which is negotiated by their Senator, Lisa Murkowski. So, it's really, really detailed and specific depending on where you are and your financial situation. But big business will be pleased, corporations will be pleased, the wealthiest will be pleased. Elon Musk should be pleased in that sense. But he's deeply concerned about the national debt, and he's been at war with Donald Trump over this for weeks and weeks.
Yes, their war of words doesn't seem to be stilling in any way, does it? Donald Trump has declared on Truth Social that he had a phone call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is their sixth publicly disclosed chat, Harriet, since he returned to the White House this year. And of course, there have been so many questions over his approach to Vladimir Putin and the fact that he seems to regard the war with Ukraine as a sort of neutral affair, that both sides are guilty. Have we had any reports out of this phone call?
Well, it's not from the White House, interestingly. They've come from the Kremlin, where the Russian spokesperson says that it was a respectful and a professional business-like discussion. We know that they spoke for over an hour. Interestingly, the Kremlin says that the issue of the US stopping supplying Ukraine with arms, that didn't come up, according to the Kremlin, which has got quite a lot of attention here because the US earlier this week, the Pentagon announced that they were halting temporarily the supply of munitions to Ukraine while they assess their own stockpiles. That's got many supporters of Ukraine quite alarmed. Zelensky is going to speak to Trump tomorrow, we believe. So there will be a sort of a further readout on this. But it seems that the Kremlin are very keen to give this idea that the Ukraine conflict is bilateral between Ukraine and Russia. They like it that the US has put this on the back burner. And the Kremlin was at pains to stress that Trump and Putin discuss the Middle East, because that's something that Putin would like to talk about, because he likes to be, the global statesman involved in world affairs, not talking about Ukraine.
But when it comes to Ukraine, as far as the Kremlin are concerned, Putin will not back down. Is that the message?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say there was not a lot of progress from what we've seen in this call. Russia remains with this idea that you have to sort of deal with the root causes of the conflict. That's the terminology that they fall back on time and time again, which of course they say is the threat of Nazis in Ukraine. That's their base, their foundation, their starting point. And as long as they stick to that, it doesn't seem like there's going to be much room for maneuver. Not a huge amount of progress, I would say, on that front.
And how does Donald Trump think he's getting on as a peacemaker and a deal maker? We've got Ukraine, we've got Gaza, we've got Israel, Iran. How does he mark his own homework?
Well, I'm sure he would give himself 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. This is Donald Trump. But realistically, Ukraine is probably something he doesn't want to talk about, because if you remember, he campaigned on ending it on day one. Well, he's certainly not done that. It's been an awful lot more complicated than he so glibly predicted before he became president. But I think he's had a fairly good week in the sense that his airstrikes on Iran have seemed to sort of settle. There has not been a massive escalation in the region, which many people feared. He has said that the Israelis are ready for a ceasefire in Gaza. He's turning his attention to that. Of course, Netanyahu will be in Washington next week to meet with Trump. Trump would very much like there to be a deal in Gaza, because that will be another tick for his box. And of course, he said repeatedly he would like to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So I think, Trump will keep quiet about Ukraine because it doesn't serve him at the moment. But he certainly will be talking about the Middle East because he feels like he's doing quite well there.
And when it comes to Iran, is there any agreement now on the extent of the damage caused by the bunker buster bombs?
I mean, it's interesting how this has evolved. There was that initial report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which of course got leaked to CNN, and the White House was absolutely furious at this because it suggested that actually the airstrikes on the nuclear facilities had only set Iran's nuclear capabilities back a couple of months, if that. And it was a very preliminary report. This was actually stressed in the intelligence, but people seized on this idea to say it wasn't effective. The White House, I think, perhaps overreacted to that and went crazy on saying, no, it was absolutely triumphant. It was spectacular. It obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. And I think we've settled somewhere now in the middle, in that it was fairly successful. It was always successful militarily, in the sense that this was a really impressive operation and they got in and out without loss of life. And it does now seem that it has set the Iranian nuclear capability back quite significantly. Of course, you also have the assassination of leading scientists, which will certainly help in that respect.
And Harriet, just got a couple of minutes left, but the US job market, it seems there's some good news on job growth numbers.
Yes, that's right. So actually better than many people expected here, given the background of the tariffs and the uncertainty. I mean, the dollar has had a terrible start to the year. And yet the jobs market numbers are actually quite encouraging. 147,000 jobs added in June. Unemployment falling slightly to 4.1%. But interestingly, personal spending is also falling. That's down slightly, 0.3%, because there is still concern about these tariffs, what it's going to mean for the long term. There are still people who say the US could be in a recession by the end of the year. And actually, when you drill into the figures, it's quite interesting because manufacturing jobs are down, 7,000 manufacturing jobs lost in June. And of course, federal government jobs are way down, 7,000 lost in June and almost 70,000 lost this year so far. So a bit of a mixed bag.
Yes, but of course, it's all about confidence, isn't it? This is the world's largest economy. How much damage is the tariff regime causing? Has anything been done in terms of restoring links with China and lowering those tariffs? I don't know if there's been much progress on that, but Donald Trump will no doubt he will say that he deserves any progress that is made on that.
Yes, and actually, he was writing on social media that America is a hot country right now, whatever that means. I mean, it's certainly very hot in New York City, I can confirm that.
Yes.
But you know, Trump will take this as a victory lap, these jobs figures. Of course he will. I mean, to be fair, they did sign a trade agreement with Vietnam this week. And there have been talks with China, of course. We've got the agreement with the UK. The devil is always in the detail. And I think people, you know, the long-term effects of these tariffs mean that people are quite wary. And, you know, the consumer confidence, as I mentioned, is fairly low. So I think it's sort of wait and see, really.
Harriet Alexander, thank you very much.